Thank you. It's nice to be back, and it's really nice that you're staying, and let's get started. Nothing more fun to talk about than millennials. In the work I do, we track all age groups, but we're especially interested in millennials because we want to know which things millennials do. They do because they're young and have time, and which behaviors they abandon when they get older. And we've been doing our work for 15 years, and we've already been able to answer the question. We're able to answer it on simple things, like the fact that millennials don't wear watches. Well, we've been tracking them from the time they were 13 to the 28. They're still not wearing watches, and we don't think they ever will. I actually don't believe that a generation that has never worn watches will wear smartwatches, and I think smartwatches are probably going to fail. We're learning, on the other hand, on a more serious level, that teenage or millennial attitudes towards privacy, there is no privacy, get over it, I have nothing to hide, are simply young attitudes. And as those people turn 29, 30, 31, they care a great deal about privacy. We're finding the way they shop, and shopping online and comparing prices and negotiating is a permanent transformational feature. And probably the most transformational thing of all is empowerment. The power they feel they're gaining over doctors. There's almost nobody who has a sniffle or an itch before they go into a doctor who doesn't look up their disease online, figure out what it may be, go in and see their doctor and become a member of the treatment team. Sadly, they do this most often with a doctor who wishes they would just shut up and take their medicine. We see that this power they gain over journalists, over government officials, is a truly defining transformational change. So we're going to have 4 great presentations on millennials. But before we do that, we will have a poll question, which we'd like you to answer. And if we can get it up on the screen, you will be able to vote on your iPads. And while they're getting it up, you'll also, during the course of the 4 presentations, be able to submit questions. We're going to save the questions till the end, but here we go. If you'll vote on the following question, do you agree with the following statement? The MENA region provides adequate educational and skill development support for an Arab youth pursuing a career in digital media. And your choices are A, strongly agree, B, agree, C, don't know, D, disagree, E, strongly disagree. Give you a moment to vote, and if you'll just put the results up as soon as, wow. So 50% disagree, and if you add in another 19%, you have almost 70% disagree or strongly disagree. And if you look at agree, almost nobody strongly agrees. A modest percentage, 14, for a total of 20, agree in some way. And interestingly, compared to most of the other questions, very few people undecided on this. So a pretty clear consensus that the region does not provide adequate educational and skill development support for an Arab youth pursuing a career in digital media. Clearly, there are challenges and opportunities ahead. With that, let's have our first presentation and invite up to the stage Ahmed Abbas, who is the COO of Qsoft Holding. He played a pivotal role in the development and upgrading of the world-renowned satirical Egyptian TV show Al-Barnameg with Bassem Youssef in its 2nd and 3rd seasons. He comes from a strong advertising and public relations background. He's worked with several multinational companies in Egypt and around the world. Let's welcome Ahmed Abbas.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you so much. Great, so I'm very happy to be here today. Thank you so much. I'm honored to be for the first time as a speaker at the ADMS. Millennials, so when I was asked to do this presentation, the first thing you usually do is that you Google millennials. So who in the room is below 35? Show of hands. All right, not so many here today, okay, but you can All right, great. So the rest you can leave. I mean, the presentation was just for the people below 35. No, I'm joking. So I'm going to talk about the future of video and video production in connection with millennials. So to talk about that, I'm sure you've been bombarded with a lot of statistics since yesterday and today, so bear with me a bit. A few numbers are very interesting here. Internet penetration in the region has doubled in the past 4 years. We have about 150 internet users. At the same time, the growth rate of internet usage compared to the rest of the world is 5% more. So we have more internet users than 4 years ago, and they're growing much faster. A catalyst to this phenomenon, as part of it, is the Arab Spring and the political scene in our region. The youth started using the internet and using social media websites to find out what's going on the streets and to communicate with each other, because traditional media was not offering them what they were expecting. At the same time, they did not just decide to consume media, they also decided to become part of the conversation. They decided to give feedback to that media, and they decided also to become part of producing media and not just consuming it. So we see another interesting thing is that Asda Marstella published a study from which I'm going to share 2 slides of them. One of them is that they asked a very simple question. In your opinion, what is the most trusted source of news? And we see over the years, social media is gaining more trust. Another question was, where do you get your news from, or what is your source of news? And again, social media and online are growing. So social media and online are growing in terms of trust and in terms of consumption. And this is very interesting, and you can tell where the future is going. When we compared growth of consumption of content over TV sets versus consumption over mobile devices, it's not even comparable. Mobile devices consumption is 35 times as much as TV consumption growth. YouTube statistics tell us that about 2 hours of content are uploaded here every minute in our region, and about 14.5 million hours are watched every day, and that's about 1,666 years a day. And I just calculated that right now. This puts the region ahead of Brazil and second to the USA in terms of content consumption on YouTube. Another very interesting study shows that if you combine the GDP of Arab-speaking countries together, that ranks us number 6 in the world. And if you compare that with the content produced in other languages, for example, Turkish language, they produce 4 times as much content as we do. And the Portuguese language produces twice as much content as we do. On YouTube alone, we consume about 5% of the content that is being watched globally. And we only produce 2% in our region. And if we talk about Saudi Arabia alone, when it comes to mobile YouTube consumption, it's about 25%. It's the highest consuming country in the world when it comes to YouTube over mobile. So it's very clear. There is a huge opportunity. There's a huge gap between consumption and production in this region. And there's a huge white space, which I'm going to talk to you about later on. When we saw this gap and we saw the opportunity that millennials are there to not just watch content, but also to become part of the conversation, it was very clear for us in Al-Barnamij. We wanted to be part of this. And our main target segment were the millennials. About 86% of our viewers were between 18 and 35. And this served us well because our subscriber base and our views, we generated 185 million views, just counting the official views from our official channel, not including mashups or user-uploaded videos, because this would quadruple this number easily. And we've had about 2.5 million subscribers. When we compared that to other content creators within our YouTube network, because we were one of the first YouTube networks, and according to socialblade.com, we are the biggest YouTube network in the region when it comes to views and revenues. About 70% from our subscriber base across our entire network are millennials as well. So millennials are not just creating content, they're also creating it. I'm sure you're familiar with most of these faces in the region. I'm going to mention some by name. So I will start with our team first. So I'm very happy and proud to be part of that great team of Al-Barnamij. Everybody in this team is a millennial. Well, not everybody, except for Bassem and his daughter Nadia. Shadi Sroor, a 19-year-old Egyptian who's making fun of Egyptian habits every day, who started on Vine. He's now having 40 million views and 300,000 plus subscribers, and that in less than a year. Fahd al-Butiri from La Yakthar Show is a live living example. He's someone who started as a stand-up comedian, became a great YouTuber, and he just starred in A2B movie, Imagination's latest production. And this is a movie that is being published globally. So he's a live living example of a very successful conversion from TV to global stardom. Another great example are Kharabish, another multi-channel network in the region with 300 million views and over 2 million subscribers. TubeStar Network is another project that we're doing where we had a call-out campaign and we received about 4,000 responses with 1,000 video submissions, and we have about 9 productions now going on that we're selling to TV networks. So we expect that in the future that TV networks, and this has already started, are going to become part of that conversation. They're going to tap into that potential of those millennials that are consuming and creating content at the same time, and they're going to try to attract them to become part of whatever they do. And we also see TV channels now trying to create content for the digital space. And this is just going to go on and grow further. Talking about advertisers are going to start to be more engaging. So this is a very interesting example from KitKat, where they created the KitKat Arabia Comedy Break, where they gathered a lot of comedians from the region and created a competition, and the winner received a very interesting award. And at the same time, they created a very engaging experience with pure branded content generating over 3 million views. So the future. Because we're a YouTube network and we work a lot with Google, we get to sit with many of those executives. And I remember a very interesting thought that an executive shared with us once. So I mentioned white space. Remember when there was just radio, there was no TV, or when there was TV and there was no internet? Every time a new medium comes up, a lot of white space is created that needs to be filled with content. So it's the opportunity. It's basically a blank sheet that needs to be filled. And this is a huge opportunity for anybody who wants to be part of the media industry. There are no gatekeepers on the internet. The only person who will stop you from sharing your ID is basically you. If you just have a mobile phone with a camera and you have an ID, that idea that you want to share with the world, you can just go ahead. And many have done that. People like Bassem, Justin Bieber, Michelle Phan's L'Oreal, who has created $1 billion industry. So there are no gatekeepers on the internet. And there is a new digital language. So the language of video optimization and of content creation online and how to develop audience online is different than traditional TV. And this is the language that millennials speak and that millennials perfect. And I believe personally that this language is the new English, because this is the language that people like Pita Planet speak, that we were just talking about, and at the same time others are speaking. So I want to leave you with those 3 thoughts, and thank you so much.
Thank you, and we'll be able to follow up on that with some questions. Let's move right on to our second presentation from Seth. Chris is the managing director at Dynamic Signal. Dynamic Signal was founded by the team behind ComScore, Flycast, and Adify, and it works with large brands, enabling them to scale their content marketing. Chris has helped build several global companies and is an investor and early advisor to many more. Chris, if you are here. And there you are.
Okay. Great to be here. Thanks for all your hospitality since we arrived. That's 9.5 minutes. I'm going to tell you a bit about me first, and then I'm going to go into some kind of macro factors on how we see the market for millennials and how that's causing change across the media industry and what the opportunities are for investors as a result of that change. I suppose my career is essentially in 3 buckets: the old, the new, and the soon-to-be even bigger. But I worked in advertising at BBDO, Time Out, and the New York Times, and I've spent around 10 years in startups since then, a couple of large social networks, social gaming companies, and right now, as Jeff said, I'm running a software as a service business called Dynamic Signal, and I'm also an advisor and investor in a number of other companies. So we've already talked about this. Millennials, anybody really born after 1980, and so that counts me out. 1.8 billion already in the world today. That's accelerating rapidly, and that map is going to be a lot more green in another 10 years' time. And just in the US, the disposable income of this generation is skyrocketing, with spend in 2017 estimated at $200 billion. What are they doing all day? Well, they're super, again, as we've heard, super connected across a range of devices, spending up to 18 hours on media every day. And one of the interesting factors here for those in the millennial generation already in the workplace is that there's an increasing blurring between work and play, between personal and professional lives. And that's a real opportunity, I think, for investment, and one in which Dynamic Signal is playing a part. Of course, print, the shift from print to mobile is also accelerating, and there's a huge upside, we believe. These slides, courtesy of Kleiner Perkins and Mary Meeker, you may have seen them before. There's a huge upside in terms of the mobile ad spend. Facebook's last quarter, as you may have seen, saw mobile ad spend close to 3 billion, with about 700 million users on mobile every day, and that really is the tip of the iceberg, we think. Of course, the flip side of that is, with the millennials particularly, that print is on the wane, and the disproportionate spend of print advertising is set to decline over the next 10 years. Broadcast, of course, is evolving, certainly not dying. In many ways, it's experiencing a rebirth. Screens, of course, are proliferating. Traditional remotes are disappearing, but people, in fact, the millennial generation, I saw an interesting stat the other day suggesting that 45% of people aged 18 to 35 would prefer to use either a mobile, a tablet, or a computer as their remote rather than the traditional remote, which, of course, we can never find. Apps are replacing channels. Again, iPlayer, a great example of that. Netflix and the internet, TV is the platform of choice for this generation. Again, this generation is a generation that's always on, it's always connected, and it's always online. Nearly 3 times as much internet TV viewing versus the non-millennial generation. 34% of viewing is on the internet. Thank you. And of course, social media is really the glue across all of the media consumption. And again, the interesting stat here from an investor's point of view is that Saudi Arabia is clearly leading the way as the global leader in, when asked the question, what would you share? Would you share everything on social, or most things on social? Saudi Arabia responded with a yes in over 60% of those polled. And again, the developing markets are really leading the way in a lot of these social behaviors, as we've heard today and yesterday, and that's set to continue. The big news in terms of investments is still focused today in the US, but again, we believe there's a big opportunity in emerging markets, and that's just going to increase as the millennial generation takes charge. The daily distribution, again, an interesting stat here. Saudi Arabia is leading the way in terms of the screen minutes attributed to the phone, to the smartphone, and again, the top 5 there are all emerging markets, one way or the other, although China isn't really an emerging market. So multiple screens are proliferating, but of course, going back to the evolution of TV, it's not a zero-sum game. And in fact, if you look at the stats from the 2012 Olympics in London, those people watching TV with a second screen connected were actually watching more TV. So TV's viewership, as I say, is really being driven by the internet and by smartphone and by tablet usage, where people are looking for all kinds of program content, all kinds of background on whether it's a sports event or a film, but also interestingly are looking for information in 10% of cases with millennials around brands. So there's a big opportunity for advertisers also with the second screen. So business models are evolving, the kind of content community, commerce opportunity is evolving fast. And there are multiple examples of companies who are building solid, robust businesses on some of these platforms here. It's never been less expensive to start a startup with Amazon's web services and the potential of large audiences with Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and others, and of course the App Store on iPhone and Google. And we again see those opportunities across multiple markets. Just a couple of examples. There's a really interesting, if you're a wine connoisseur, there's a really interesting social network for wine connoisseurs called Vivino, which is completely built on a social platform. And if you're a fisherman, Fishbrain you should check out, which is also very interesting for the millennial generation. So looking at some of the numbers and rattle through this really quickly, the capital is still very much US focused, but again, Europe, the Middle East and Africa is certainly growing, more than twice as fast as the US, but still proportionately small. And again, just looking at the European markets here, investment is very more evenly spread than it was 10 years ago. Of course, the big winners in social media and in technology, the big billion-dollar exits have typically and remain Silicon Valley based in the main. But just 3 future winners that I'm involved with. The first there, the live internet courtesy of Banjo, which is a fascinating app which provides the location layer for the internet, enables you to look at a live stream of social content through a grid reference, through a city, through a street, through any address, and provides multiple opportunities for news organizations and consumers alike. Second example there, Dynamic Signal, which I talked about and Jeff introduced, is a software as a service business, which is really connecting the two worlds of one's personal and professional life and powering advocacy for companies through their employees, building extreme value through that. And the third example, a very fascinating business called Controlio, early stage company based in London, which is building a consumer-facing business to empower individuals to take control of their data, the data that companies are amassing on them. Very interesting from a privacy point of view, but even more interesting from a commercial point of view, as it gives those individuals the chance to turn the tables, if you like, on companies and actually invite those companies to provide them with offers, provide them with interesting things to do based on the data that they are then able to either turn on or turn off at the times that they're choosing. So that's it from me, and thank you for listening.
Interesting about Saudi Arabia, those numbers are adjusted for population. So we'd love to get into that and why, whether it's the youth of the population. All right, our third presentation is Satyan Gajwani. He is the CEO of Times Internet. Times Internet is the digital arm of the Times of India group. For those who aren't familiar, India, one of the few markets where printed newspaper circulation is skyrocketing. It'll be interesting to see if that continues as the population gets older and as digital becomes bigger. The Times of Internet group has over 100 million monthly visitors. Satyan also runs the Times Internet companies as a collection of startups, with each one having independent leadership. In the past 18 months, the Times Internet Group has made 3 acquisitions, 5 global business alliances, and over 20 plus investments. Satyan, delighted to have you.
Hello? Yep, cool. Great, so I'm going to speak about something a little bit different. Maybe I missed the brief, I'm not sure. But so I run Times Internet. It's a large media company's digital arm. But we run very independently. And what I wanted to speak about today was a bit about why we don't really like to think of ourselves like a media company, and some of the ways that we run that we think define us differently from how most media companies run. So the first question is, what is a digital media company, right? So media, if you put it very simply, is the means of communication. Whoops, I can stand here and I can see these slides myself. The means of communication that reach or influence people widely. Now, traditionally, when you think about media, you think about news or entertainment content, and that's where we think about, in the digital spectrum, companies like the New York Times and CNN. But increasingly, we've seen that spectrum really widen. So you've seen digital-first companies like Huffington Post and BuzzFeed, and you started to see platforms like Netflix and Spotify. But increasingly, we think of companies like Facebook and Apple and Android and Amazon and Xiaomi actually turning into media companies of their own as they really verticalize and offer content alongside many other services. All of these, in our minds, are media companies. So we're a little bit different than most media companies when we go online in that we do run our traditional brands online, like the Times of India, which is the largest English newspaper in the world, and the Economic Times. But we've really expanded our portfolio well beyond that. We started partnering with companies like Huffington Post and Gizmodo and Business Insider and many others. We developed digital-first news brands like India Times and another one, ClickBuzz, we recently acquired. We've expanded even further into actually having entertainment platforms like Ghana, a music streaming service, Box TV, a video streaming service, and we've actually realmed further into commerce and transactional services as well. Now, from our perspective, we are a digital media company, but we think of all of these and all of the different properties that we run as different types of media outlets in their own right. We reach about 100 million users every month, and we're very fortunate because we're in a market that is probably the most exciting digital market in the world today. India has anywhere between 150 and 200 million people connected online today, but the view is that in 3 or 4 years that will reach 500 million. And at that point, the scale of opportunity is really, really significant. We're the largest Indian digital group by traffic on a monthly basis, and we have about 2 billion page views every month. So what makes a digital media company special? What makes it different? Today I wanted to just focus on 4 very simple things which are related to culture but really relate into how they actually operate as companies. The first thing is that they think wider. Now, I've heard a lot of presentations today talking about the need for the TV industry to go from here, to combat piracy, to do a number of different things. When we think about growth, and when we see how other digital media companies think about growth, the level of potential expansion has a different framework of opportunity, right? I'll give a simple example of Spotify. Now, Spotify has this incredible opportunity. They have this possibility of being on every single person's phone globally. That is hundreds of millions of users who could be listening to music. And yet last week, or this week, Spotify announced a partnership with Uber to say, how do we now bring Spotify into the car experience? And increasingly, Spotify's attitude is, how do we bring Spotify into the home? How do we bring Spotify into the office? How do we bring it into pretty much every environment you're in? And I think culturally it's an important point because digital media companies have this opportunity to think well beyond a single medium or a single channel or a single way of approaching consumers. The other thing that I think digital media companies do well is that as they expand their reach and expand their brand's association, they keep a very strong connection with their consumer. So most traditional media brands, when they go online, they say, okay, we need to have a Facebook page, and we need to have a Twitter page, and an Instagram page, and blah, 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 blah. And that's all great. But at the end of the day, they're diluting, in some ways, their ownership and relationship with the customer as other platforms make it stronger. And I think some of the things that we've learned is that really good digital media companies learn that as they expand, they still keep that relationship with the customer. The second thing that I think is very different about a digital media company is that they operate with a lot more science and a lot less art. So when we think about growth or marketing, we are incredibly quantitative. Yes, we do print ads and TV ads and many other things, but we think about what are the product-enhanced features which we can directly attribute to taking a product from 1 million users to 10 million users to 50 million users over the next few years. And it's an incredibly quantitative study to do that. We use data to validate our decision-making. This is one of the dashboards, for instance, that we use for our news properties. Oops, back there. So this is one of the dashboards we use for our news properties, which is on a regular basis telling us what are people consuming, how is it changing on a minute basis or on a second basis, so that we can regularly adapt our content. And when we think about advertising, we're ready to look at ways to analyze and assess and validate the value that we bring, rather than simply saying we're really big and really important and you should associate with us. And we deliver performance in many different ways. So I think digital media companies differentiate in some sense because they're incredibly quantitative. And that's a weird thing to hear in the media world, because media companies are about creativity and are about content, and not necessarily about math and science. And I think that's an interesting distinction that's there. The third thing that I think is different is that media companies thrive in hyper-competition. Now, why do I say hyper-competition? Because unlike a TV business, which has 50 or 100 or 200 competitors, or a print business that may have 5 or 10 competitors, or a radio business that may have 20 competitors, the internet literally has thousands of companies, some of which are billions of dollars of value, some of which are literally 4 kids sitting in a garage. And all of them are competing. And that level of hyper-competition means that the way you operate is dramatically different. You react much faster. If we told you that today, 3 years ago, the largest revenue driver for Facebook didn't exist, you wouldn't really believe it. And yet Facebook has been able to really adapt amazingly to figure out that mobile advertising, they figured out a specific methodology within that, saw its uptake, and then reacted rapidly to evangelize it. Most of the major digital media companies you'll ever meet have changed in many, many ways. And they embrace that change and are very willing to accept that pivoting, as they call it, is a positive thing, not a negative thing. They also realize, and this is one of the really different things about digital media versus traditional media, in many ways, outcomes are binary. Either you succeed or you don't. There's not really a lot of space for 4 people doing the same thing. There's not a lot of space for multiple players and ratings to go up and down. That's not how it works. And so what happens is, when you're aiming for things like market share, you think about that far more than you think about cash flows. So the classic quintessential example is Facebook and MySpace. A traditional media attitude would have said both will exist, they'll continue trade-off on share, one will be bigger this month, one will get bigger next month, they'll have their ups and downs. And when News Corp took over, they ran it like a traditional media company in many ways. As a result, Facebook, which was a lot less profit-oriented and a lot more oriented around building the best consumer experience and focusing on market share, really took the cake. And what we realize is that the whole idea of competition is very, very different online than it is offline. The last thing that I want to talk about is the importance of teams. So in traditional media, one of the things that happens, part of the reason you have so much less competition is because it's expensive to start a traditional media business. Starting a TV business, you have to have distribution, that costs a lot of money. You have to have a production setup, that costs a lot of money. Whereas in digital, anybody can start a business. And so what happens is the only asset that you really have, which is special, are the people who run your business. And I think this is something that actually involves itself very differently. So the type of people we try to recruit, we think about hiring entrepreneurs more than professionals. Now that's a very generic statement, but the best example I can give you is that in the last 4 or 5 people we've hired, they joined. I think this is true for about 4 of the 5 of them. After 2 or 3 days, they came back to me, and they had joined on a specific role saying, I'm going to take on this project, I'm going to drive it. They came back 3 days later and they said, Satyan, what's my title? And they said, who do I report to? And it's a crazy thing, because in a traditional media world where you think about hierarchy and you think about bureaucracy and spoke of authority, who reports to who, it's different here. It's, of course, there is hierarchy, there are structures. But in general, people are a lot more focused on outcome and impact more than on authority. And so it becomes a different kind of cultural mindset that you use in how you operate. The other major change is that as a company, you have to be ready to lose control. Because things change so quickly that if you're not able to change as quickly as the environment does, you will fail. And this is one of the things that's very hard for a traditional company, which has had very good processes and controls and setups and whatever it may be. To let go of those and really lose control a bit is a critical step. And the flip side of it is that you have to have very aggressive incentives. When people succeed, they have to feel like there is a major upside for them if you really want to retain and motivate the best talent. So quickly to summarize, digital companies think wider, they're more scientific, they thrive in competition, and they focus on having great, exceptional team members. The last statement I'll make, and then I'm going to run off stage, is that I don't think this is just about media companies. Part of the reason I think this presentation is about millennials is because there's a new breed of companies across media and across industries that is coming up that's looking at the world differently. And that's saying that a lot of the old ways in how companies operated, which were centered on hierarchy, bureaucracy, process, stability, and predictability, are going to change. And I think that's really exciting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And what beautiful slides. What real effort and energy went into that. Everybody has been so good on time. Most of the job of a moderator is to keep the traffic flowing. You've made my job easy. And our final presentation, before we get into a little discussion, is from Vince Ghossoub. He's the co-founder and CEO of Falafel Games. And it's getting so late, and I'm getting so hungry. A falafel sounds good right about now. Falafel Games is a producer and publisher of massive multiplayer online games with a Middle Eastern flavor. Two of their games, Knights of Glory and The Last War, have achieved great financial and critical success. Vince, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Seth, for the presentation. Okay. So I'm Vincent Ghossoub, co-founder and CEO of Falafel Games. I'm asked to talk about millennials with respect to games, or vice versa, games with respect to millennials, or both. So if I have to think about it and have a 1-minute presentation about what are games in the lives of millennials, or what do millennials mean for games, it would be this, that millennials are a generation who were told by their parents that it's unacceptable, mostly, to play games. But they are a generation who will tell their kids, mostly, that it's totally acceptable to play games. This is it. This is my presentation. If I have to finish in 1 minute, that's it. It's a generation that wasn't allowed to play games mostly, but that would accept and embrace games for the next generation mostly. But we have time. Let's think a little bit about what does this mean? The ramifications, the consequences, the results of this generational shift. Okay, so I'm a millennial myself. Okay, depending on where you set the boundary of millennials, I may be an older millennial, but a millennial nonetheless. And I remember when I was a kid, my parents would drag me out of my console to send me to bed. You know, you can't play, it's your bedtime, come on, just go to bed. So this is what I was faced. What I faced, and a lot of my friends faced. But I don't think that I or my friends would do the same behavior to the next generation. We love games, we've played games, and we would totally embrace and let the next generation play games. So a natural consequence of this is that, not surprisingly, gamers will be more and more. Across devices, across generations, there will just be a larger proportion of games. It's going from the fringe teenager sitting in his living room playing alone to a mainstream. I mean, even now, even as a lot of millennials don't have kids yet, gaming is in a lot of ways a global pastime. In terms of time spent on the smartphone and other devices, and time spent out of a person's time. So in terms of how much more gamers do we have? If you look at the Facebook platform, at Facebook, okay, more than half of whoever belongs to Facebook or whoever touched Facebook in the last month are interested in games. Now, this is the millennial. This is all of Facebook's population. Now, you can say, okay, there will be more games, more gamers. Is it good? Is it bad for society? The millennials are having a bad influence. It can be. It can be good. It can be bad. It can be a blessing. It can be a curse. But it's inevitable. and we have to, accept it and deal with it. It's just like fire, When we first find out about fire, it can protect us. It can use us. We can use it to do harm. It can be good. It can be bad. But now, especially living in Abu Dhabi, we cannot think that we can live without fire. So it's gonna happen. It's going to be acceptable, and in particular in this region, if we look at some statistics, bottom-up statistics that we have from our network. So we reach about single-digit million players on a monthly basis. And I would say that, so our own data shows that 2/3 of Saudi gamers and United Arab Emirates gamers are millennials. All right, so we have two numbers there. Half of Facebook is interested in games, and 2/3 of Saudi and UAE are gamers are millennials. So it means that there will be more gamers, and among gamers, millennials are the driving force of that. They remain a question mark, okay? Games are good, games are bad. But it will no longer be a question mark in the next generation. Okay, it's not such a huge insight to say that one generation is a transition between the previous and the next. But in the particular case of millennials, it is a major tipping point, a major shift in how it affects the scale of gamers. Now, this deals with how much. Let's look at how it affects the next generation. Today, with the millennials, with those question mark, they may look at buying necessities first. Let's see how it affects their commerce. They may think of buying necessities first, then going out for a movie, having dinner, and then maybe, if there's any disposable income left, do an in-app purchase. Okay, those lines are going to be blurred in the complementary things. After necessities, after we pay our rent, and after we buy food, once we have to decide whether we are going to go for dinner or buy a new pair of jeans or do an in-app purchase, a virtual item, those things are going to blur. The complementary things, whether virtual or physical, there will not be a priority for physical on virtual. There will just be they will just be mixed. For example, so you go to Abu Dhabi Mall, you see people buying $150, $200 pairs of jeans. What are they buying? What? Is it really worth $200? Maybe there's something else they're buying. Is it status, social recognition, belonging to a certain group, psychological satisfaction? Maybe some of those. Most people would say it's a combination of those things. So games just sell this. Games just sell status, social recognition, psychological satisfaction, social belonging. So they sell you this and without selling the fabric. So it's even looks kind of like a better deal than going to Abu Dhabi Mall and getting a pair of jeans. So virtual, physical will no longer exist. It will be mixed. There will be a better deal in getting a virtual item or a better deal in getting a physical item. The boundaries will be totally gone. As a matter of fact, if you look at our own community of gamers on our own network, we've had over the past couple of years tens of couples meet and get married in our games. We've had employers find employees within our games. I hear news inside of our games before it's on Twitter or on TV or anywhere else from my clan within my game. Condolences. Some clans send condolences and money to the parents of some deceased players. It happens even before their real-world friend. So when games actually do mean today so much to some people in terms of social connectedness, marriage, employment, death, belonging, news, they already mean this. Is it really a question to say are virtual items less important to them than physical items? What they mean for them in terms of social connectedness is the same. whether virtual or physical, it doesn't matter. They have so much, games are hosting such important social environments that it's no longer a question to question whether, virtual, I want to buy a virtual hat or a physical hat. So that's the first observation in terms of how millennials would affect behavior in commerce. And another one is how it would affect how millennials and games would affect, in the next generation, industry. So we've looked through most of this conference at the great, let's call it a great unbundling of power. In journalism, it used to be like a central body of intelligence that does the editorial work for news and broadcasts to the edges. So this is completely obliterated. Now every node on the network is itself a news station, a TV station. I'm going to give a small background on this great unbundling and then say how games and the effect of millennials and games affect this. Let's call it great unbundling for now. So this unbundling in journalism is not only happening in journalism, it's going to happen in education, in banking and finance, in government, in commerce. In education, for example, it's no longer like a teacher who's like the vessel of all knowledge, opening his vessel of knowledge and distributing it broadcasting it to the nodes of the network. Everybody's a teacher. I can speak English, someone is looking, maybe. I can speak Mandarin, someone is looking to study Mandarin, I may be able to teach him. I can become a school myself. Today we see a little bit of this transition with teachers being more enablers of learning as opposed to vessels of learning. It's banking will be unbundled that way. Everyone can be a borrower or a lender, and it doesn't have to be, a total solution of corporate finance, consumer finance, mortgages, and I don't know what, totally unbundled. The central body of intelligence is no longer doing in the center, it's risk management and then deciding for everybody. Everyone can be a bank. Education, if we dig too deep in this, we may open a Pandora's box, but it's getting unbundled. Government may get unbundled. Commerce certainly unbundled, even beyond the eBays and just, way beyond the eBay models. So where do games stand in this? Am I going to say that games are also getting unbundled and we are going to co-create games on a mass scale and everyone will be millions of people across the world creating a single game? Yes, but it's not just that. This is going to happen. People are already writing books, co-creating books at massive scale. It's going to move to game, another form of art. But game is no longer going to just behave as one vertical within this industry. It's going to also be a horizontal enabler of all those industries. It would act as the lingua franca in the community guidelines of those industries. Frequent flyer programs are gamified. Airline industry is gamified. Schools, Duolingo is a gamification. Wikipedia, the way its community structure works, is a gamification. So the generation after the millennials, they are used to player control. They are used to immediate feedback. They will be used to immediate feedback. They will be used to narratives. They will be used to social connectedness, social flow. It's natural for them to use those gaming principles to regulate all the other verticals that are getting unbundled. So this is it, to summarize. How much? Huge growth in gamers thanks to the millennials, their shift in attitude between, the attitude towards the next generation. They are the main drivers of games in Saudi and United Arab Emirates. How virtual and physical goods are no longer comparable, they are just mixed. They are comparable by their value, and at the industry level, a horizontal enabler of many other industries. Now, but all of this is at insight. I mean, at the end of the day, civilizations always, if you think of play, games, it's about the core concept of fun, and we've always looked for fun. We've always tried to seek fun, Ancient Chinese have boards, dice. Ancient Egyptians have boards, dogs and jackals. Now we find in archaeological sites in Turkey beautiful little pawns that were used on boards. So, in fact, to go back to the story when my parents would kick me out of my console into my bed, most often I would wait a couple of minutes, get out of my bed and try to sneak back into the living room, only to find my own parents playing my own games on my own console. So really, they didn't want to get me out of the console because it's my bedtime. They just wanted to play my games, but did not want to say it. But millennials are saying it, embracing it with a resounding embrace, and this is the main difference that they will be doing. This is then I knew that I should enter the gaming business. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Those were 4 really thoughtful presentations. If we can have the other 3 come up, and it's getting late, but it's still not too late to have a good discussion. There's no place for me to sit, so I'm going to stand. I may walk behind you and really nudge you in the back if you go on too long. But thank you for that. So I want to get the audience involved. And incidentally, is the iPad with the audience questions available? If not, we can just take questions from the floor. Okay. But let me just start with one big question. I think for those of us who are older than millennials, there comes that awful moment in life. Sometimes it's with your own children, sometimes it's when you say something, when you realize you've become your parents, and the terror is real. Is that going to happen to millennials? Is the way they're playing games going to change? Will they be playing games the same way when they're 75 years old, teaching their kids how to do it? Will they be watching television the same way? Will they go back to linear? How much of this is a function of the fact they're young, and as we talked a little bit in the panel before, they have time, and as they get older and they have responsibilities, will they really have changed, or will they become their parents?
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure. Not sure yet, but if I have to make a guess, is from my own personal experience, if I like to play action RPGs today, then I'm 75-year-old. I think I would like to play then.
So you think you will be playing games at 75?
I expect to, if I live so long. But yes, I expect to be playing games then.
And other thoughts on that? On which of these are which are transitional behaviors and which are transformational behaviors? And we're talking a lot about media. Chris?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting observations there is the platforms obviously change, the games change, the behaviors and the cultural changes that technology and the media is driving today are going to be with us for decades, if not centuries. So I think one of the interesting areas there is the blurring between personal and professional. People are increasingly playing in the workplace. Perhaps they're not meant to be gaming in the workplace, but sharing content from the workplace about their companies and equally working from home. And I think that's a big opportunity for media businesses to
So I'm still
to
not
harness.
getting a good handle on this, though. Are the millennials really different?
Yes. I think
And permanently different?
They will always be different. I think you'll always see
But
consumption.
boomers were different from their parents when they were young, and I'm sad to say we became our parents. Are millennials permanently, to the best of your knowledge? We're not going to really know.
So they will be what they are today, and they'll continue to be that. But I think the more important point is that especially as technologies change things, you are going to see newer and more different and weirder consumption habits develop as kids, as younger people get older. So I'll give 2 examples. Okay, one is email. All of us live on email. The generation that's 15 to 20 doesn't use email at all because messaging apps have replaced that for them. That's a completely different communication paradigm than what we've ever grown up with.
But messaging apps work, and I'm not challenging you, I'm really trying to understand from you. Messaging apps work because they're synchronous, by and large.
So let me give
when you have time, you can do synchronous. Email is great when you do asynchronous, when you have kids and jobs and sleep. So do you think they will stay synchronous?
So if I told you that there was a company that in the US drives more than 10% of all bandwidth at certain times, where all people do is watch other people play video games, you would say that is crazy, and that I'm crazy for that to even be an idea, let alone
unless
a company,
you're Amazon. Yeah.
unless you were actually realizing that it was $1 billion acquisition by Amazon, and it was one of the largest drivers of video consumption in the world, which was kids or people watching other people play video games. Now, if you call that media consumption, that is what it is.
Sure.
But it's completely foreign to even someone like me who's 30, who I guess is now old in that sense, right? And no offense to everyone else here, but my point is that even I find I'm not able to identify with what a 15-year-old wants today. And my guess is when that 15-year-old becomes 30, he will have a hard time understanding what a 20-year-old or a 15-year-old.
As it's always been. But
faster now.
But the question is, does it all even out at 50, 60, 70?
It doesn't.
Or has some,
No.
I mean, this is the difference between transformation and just transitional change.
It's a transformation. If you look at, and that's not an effect of millennials, it's an effect of just games going mainstream. If you look at my parents' generation, or people that are above 50.
Your parents who wanted to play your games.
Right, so now they are more publicly there, and the whole generation, and data is behind it. This segment is actually growing. Games for seniors are more and more in demand today. It's not like the cohort of millennials is going to ask for games. The cohort before millennials is already embracing games in their senior age.
Our work shows the heaviest gamers are people over the age of 65, but that's with the broad definition of games as solitaire, Sudoku, Scrabble, crossword puzzles. And those are games. When you look at massive multiplayer games, they're not 70.
But I think the other way of looking at this is the millennials are actually teaching the older generations to behave like millennials, and that's happening with multi-screen usage. Is not just the preserve of a 35 or under individual. We all do that all the time, whether we admit to it or not, whether we're concentrating on the task at hand, we're usually doing 2 or 3 things or trying to. 80% of millennials say that they sleep with their phone by their bed. And I know that's true from my house. But again, it's not exclusively the behavior of a 15-year-old boy. It's also his father. So I think that we're learning and we're changing our behavior as a result of the technology around us.
And I was very cool when I taught my parents how to use a VCR. And anyway, we're not going to get an answer. We just can get some thoughts on this.
Where did you fly in from?
Sorry?
Did you fly into Abu Dhabi?
I flew in from, I live in the U.S.
Did you use your frequent flyer number?
I'm sorry.
Did you use your frequent flyer number on your trip?
I sure did.
You did?
Yes.
How many points did you get?
I don't know. I'll find out.
Did you level up from silver to gold?
Abu Dhabi's far away.
Are you going to check if you leveled up?
At some point, yes.
Yeah, so you are most likely playing a game, and it's a game that permeates the airline industry.
You don't have to convince me of gaming. Gaming is everywhere, and we play games in all things. And games, I think 10 years ago, we thought games were teenage boys frittering away their time or serial killers in training. We're now learning that game playing, managers know that gamers are the best employees. They know how to do teamwork, task orientation. There's lots to learn from games. So let's open it to some questions. Maybe I screwed up. I don't have my iPad. So we're going to have to do it with microphones, but we have about 8 or 9 minutes and would love to take some questions. It is late, but I still have energy. There's lots of food waiting for us. Question over there, if we can get a microphone to... first the lady and then the gentleman, if you can pass it to the gentleman behind you when you're finished. And if it's a general question or if it's specific to one person, let us know.
Hello? Yes. Thank you for the presentations. I am a parent that is older than a millennial. I have a 7-year-old boy at home, and I am strong in controlling him playing games. But later on, I find that this is a problem because he's complaining that his friends is playing some games and it's kind of culture. Gaming becomes a culture, and he feels like he's out of that culture. He lost the conversation with his friends. So the question I'm asking here is, when you guys as like game creators or designers, how can you combine gaming and education, as well as like social responsibilities and moral ethics for those millennials?
So how can you build parenting into gaming? How can you build good values into gaming? Or are they antithetical?
Well, it's what you make of it. It's just like I said, it's like, fire. You can use it to be protected or to be bad. Now, some of the most vocal proponents of technology do ask their own children to limit the use of technology. So when we make games, oftentimes we take this into consideration and we actively monitor and, remind players who spend like more than 12 hours in a row in a game that maybe it's time to go have a break or it's prayer time or something. I don't think we figured out how to integrate games in education. But certainly education is a broken game and it needs to be fixed. Many people are going to try to fix it and many are going to fail, but many people are also going to succeed in trying to fix the game that is education.
I'll give you a practical example of a company that is doing this, I think doing it really well. It's a company called Little Bridge World, based in London, and they started their business as an educational virtual world multiplayer game in a way for English speakers to learn foreign languages, and there's a whole gamification layer in there, prizes, incentives, rewards for answering educational questions, but they flipped the model a couple of years ago, so now it's more about people who are non-English speakers learning English, and so it's a fascinating product, and I think there are going to be many more examples like that in the future, where you can combine gaming with education and make it fun and deliver value, working with the education systems in each country, rather than it being something that lives outside it. So
Great.
We'll see.
Before we get to the next question, Satyan, I thought that was a really powerful presentation on media companies, and I don't want you to get lost in all the discussion of gaming. Let's get the next question queued up. But let me ask, I assume the Times of India, the printed newspaper part, is what paid initially and supported all these internet ventures.
Still does.
And still does. But do you see a day when the reverse will happen?
Yeah.
When the printed paper will recede and the digital properties will be the work engine of the company?
I mean, that's why we're making the investments we are today. I mean, the cool thing about what we're doing is the scale. Our newspapers are very large in India, and we probably reach 20 or 30 million people with them, with a very high engagement. Online, our expectation is that today we're reaching about 100 million users, and we should be able to reach anywhere between 300 and 400 million in the next 5 years. And with that kind of a reach, of course, you have to figure out how to monetize it well and actually build good businesses, and it's way harder online in many ways. But if you get it right, the upward opportunity is just phenomenal.
And do you think the printed newspaper will eventually disappear in India?
I mean, at some point it may. I think the difference is that in India there are a lot of macro factors and business-centric factors which keep it around. So like, we keep the newspaper at a very low cover price continuously, even today, and that helps fuel growth. Whereas in many countries, they're increasing the price of newspapers, which in my mind is reducing the demand for it.
Interesting. All right, we had another question, gentleman, I think behind the lady. Yeah, there you are.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the great presentations. I missed the being a millennial with few years, but I have two daughters who are quite young. They are not millennial, but so I can see the...
You don't have daughters, you have a laboratory.
Yeah, exactly. But I can see the difference between my age and what they go through, and the privacy, the issue with what I think about privacy and the way they think about privacy. And obviously millennials fuel the internet, but this new generation will fuel many, many other things that we cannot even think about. My question not really about millennials, but to Satyan. You talked about the digital media companies and the way the management is, quite different. My question is, I'm looking at, all the successful startup, the digital companies. Let's say, Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerbergs and Sergey's, and they start the company, but they always turn to someone who's adult to run the company later on. In Steve Jobs' case and Mark Zuckerberg's case and the Sergey's case.
Didn't work out so well for Steve Jobs initially.
Well, you can say that.
I actually completely disagree. I think the best digital companies that show longevity are the ones where the founder is still very actively running it, right? So Jeff Bezos runs Amazon, Zuckerberg runs Facebook, Sergey and Larry both run Google, whereas companies that have become very professional-centric, like say eBay, really haven't had the same level of thriving, and the older IT companies like Oracle and whatnot are really trying to reinvent themselves. So actually, I think the only way that a company can really continue to be really nimble, not focused on process, very aggressive, probably a little bit more risk preferring, probably a little bit less sensitive to stockholders and to shareholders, is if there is a very strong promoter or a strong sort of leadership figure who frankly doesn't give a crap what anybody else thinks and just has a vision and really executes on it.
Which is probably the lesson Steve Jobs learned after he turned the company over to John Sculley and then came back. And did the great things having learned that lesson. I think we could slide one more question in. I can't choose, so it's whoever gets the microphone first. We'll do two, but just those two. Make them fast, though.
Hi, I'm Jayant. I work in a consulting firm. I have a question for Satyan. By the way, great presentation. You talked about the fourth point that you made around a good team and what it takes to motivate the millennials who work with you.
Yeah.
I'm assuming, and point me if I'm wrong, you also might have people who are non-millennials in your company. And how does the interactions happen? I mean, do you see conflicts? Do you see battles?
Yes.
And how do you sort of resolve those as the CEO?
Look, I think at the end of the day, you have to have a single vision on what you want the company to be. There will be people who align to that vision and who start to buy into it and believe in it, no matter what their age is or no matter what their profile is. And then there are people that won't. And over time, you'll find that the people who really thrive in your system are the ones who align with the values that you set up. And the truth is that sometimes there'll be conflict, and you tend to go with which one sort of fits with where you believe the company should be going. And that's how you resolve it.
Right. And then we did have one last over in the corner, and truly our last.
Thanks. My question, very quick, is what's the next opportunity for creating content for the millennials? Is it gaming? What kind of gaming? Or is it something else?
Why don't we try to do that quickly with each of you, rather than one person? But quickly, if you don't mind. Ahmed?
I think there's an opportunity in each space. I mean, there will be an opportunity in gaming, there will be an opportunity in content, in online publishing. It's I think in each field there will be, and there will be other platforms that will emerge. I mean, the internet as we know it today will not be the same thing in the future. There's the Internet of Things. Your refrigerator will be connected with your shop. So I think in the future, I think opportunities will be diverse and on many platforms.
Not going to be able to make any stock investments on that. I'm hoping I'm going to be able to do some investing after the next three.
I think, I don't know gaming that well, so I'll stay out of that one. But let's say in video, I think content that's suited for mobile really is defined to me by length. So I think the most interesting thing that you'll see happen is a lot shorter and very different format lengths. So today you have a half-an-hour TV show and a 2-hour movie. And tomorrow we're seeing things like 6-second videos and 20-second videos. But I think the sweet spot for mobile for like continuous content will be between 1 and 5 minutes. And if you actually saw shows get developed that are that length, it would be pretty interesting.
Vince?
Well, in terms of what content, I also think it's, especially for this region, is across the board. It doesn't matter whether it's gaming or video or news or new formats like Sati is saying. But for the millennials in particular, actually everybody is targeting millennials. It's quite competitive, whatever segment you look at. What you should think of is the millennials in the future. So are we going to be making content or games in particular for millennials who grow older and what will their preferences be, and the kids of millennials. So people born not knowing that a screen may not be swiped. Any screen would be swiped at tactile interface. So what do you do for those kids who the millennials are going to bring to this world?
All right, Chris, finally, to wrap it up, bring it home.
Yeah, two things. User-generated video, making the millennials, empowering them to be producers, and adding more perspective to the internet, which is still quite a two-dimensional experience for most people. So giving Oculus as an example of where that's going, but also I think Banjo with building a location layer to the internet so that people can see the internet and digital media through the lens of where people are as opposed to just what's on it.
Great. Other than the fact I had to stand, I wish we could have gone on and on and on. I know there's going to be a closing. I hope you will come back tomorrow when I will moderate all the sessions. And thank you very, very much. Really enjoyed those 4 presentations.